Fatale is a film that came out in 2002 that's written and directed by Brian De Palma. So Femme Fatale is a $50 Patreon request that comes from one of my friends from the land down under, Mitchie. Mitchie apparently is a huge fan of Brian De Palma. He's one of the few people I know that has either seen all of his films or damn near all of them. And he told me he was going to request a Brian De Palma film one day. And sure enough, here he is requesting Femme Fatale. And me, myself, I like Brian De Palma. I haven't really dived that deep into his filmography to really have a passionate opinion about him. But I mean, I've seen Scarface, the classic. I've seen Carrie. I've seen Body Double. I've seen Carlito's Way. So I've seen a small handful of his films. And I love Scarface to death. That's a film that's near and dear to my heart. Carrie's obviously a great film. Carlito's Way, another great film. So, Brian De Palma is a filmmaker that, at least from the films that I've seen from him, I think he has a lot of talent behind the camera. And after seeing Femme Fatale, I think it's, like, I wouldn't really, in my personal opinion, rate this among his best, at least the one that I've seen. It's probably one of my lesser favorites of his. But I do think that this is a solid, recommendable film. And a lot of it for me is due to the fact that Brian De Palma's presence is ever so apparent behind the camera in this film. I think this film's ultimate strength comes from its presentation. Because this film contains many different long takes. Not incredibly long, but there are some moderately lengthy takes in this film. And the opening shot of this film is also shot in this kind of long take. And it's what immediately got me hooked into this film, because not only is it shot in a long take, but the main character, the Femme Fatale, is played by Rebecca Romijn. In the opening sequence, she doesn't say a word. And I thought that did an excellent job at kind of adding this layer of mystery to her character. And the opening high sequence to this film I have such a confusing experience with it, because in terms of how it's all directed and how the action unfolds on screen, I actually think it's pretty damn great. But one thing about the opening high sequence that I don't even really know how to fully feel about was the musical score. Because the musical score sounds like this upbeat Hollywood type music while like really intense things are happening. And it felt really juxtaposed to the events that were unfolding. And I completely understand that that was an intentional choice. And, perhaps it's a callback to the noir genre or the way Femme Fatale characters are presented throughout film history. But for me, I couldn't really focus and fully engage myself with the opening sequence because that music just felt awkward to me. And I can tell that that's something that people are going to be divided on, because I think this film is actually quite divisive. I think Mitchie told me this was at least his top 3 favorite De Palma films, and reviews for this film are all over the place. Some people really hate it, and some people think it's fantastic. And I'm kind of somewhere in the middle, and that's because I found a decent handful of the score throughout this film to be a bit distracting and out of place. And also, I just really wasn't a huge fan of the writing of the dialogue in this film, and even some of the acting. But sometimes it's hard for me to tell what was really the culprit. Was it just some of the cheesy bad writing, or was it the line delivery? In some cases, it may have been a bit of both. But one positive that I will say is that despite those issues I had with the film, Antonio Banderas, I think, killed it in this film. He was one of the few things in the film, besides Brian De Palma's style that's apparent throughout this film, that I could look forward to and know that whenever he's on screen, I'm going to be entertained. I'm going to be engaged in what's happening. I just think he's a brilliant actor, and whenever he's on screen in this film, he just knocks it out of the park, and he's completely convincing as this kind of voyeuristic photographer. But one thing in regards to Brian De Palma's stylistic choices in this film is that he at times decides to use this kind of split screen stylistic approach to a handful of scenes in this film that give you multiple perspectives of the same scene that's happening. And I actually kind of like that because I feel like perception and perspective is one of the themes of this film. And I thought the split screen approach kind of does an excellent job at getting the audience to understand how complex the world is and how so many different things can be happening at once that can be completely separate from each other, but at the same time are connected and related to each other. And one thing about this film that I actually didn't expect was that going into a film called Femme Fatale, you kind of expect it to be more linear and easy to understand and digest, but it's actually quite confusing and a bit complex, to where once the film ended, it just left me scratching my head and I had a bunch of questions as to what I saw. And in this case, I actually like that. Even though I'm not sure if I fully understand everything in terms of what this film is conveying narratively and even character-wise, the way this film went about conveying its ambiguities and conveying its more complex story details, I liked quite a bit. Because even though I wasn't really a huge fan of the way the dialogue was written and perhaps from the way it was delivered, there's surprisingly not that much dialogue in this film. There are some entire sequences that are conveyed purely through the visuals and through the filmmaking. And a lot of the most confusing aspects of this film that will leave a lot of people scratching their heads are again conveyed through the aesthetics and through the visual storytelling. And that's one thing that I respected out of this film. But I will say there was a twist in this film that honestly, like, it was really frustrating and it kind of angered me a little bit. And if you don't want to hear exactly what it is, I'll put the spoiler thing up in a second. But I have to kind of go into just a little bit of spoilers here because it's almost impossible to talk about this film in terms of why I was frustrated by it. But there's your fair warning. At about, like, when this film only has about maybe 25 minutes left to go, it's revealed that an entire hour or hour and a half of the film was purely a vision from the main character. And she basically wakes up and she sees entire months play out and what it leads to. And based on that vision, she goes and does a different course of action that makes it to where she is now privileged with certain information and decides to do something different with her life instead of what was expressed in her vision. And, you know, one angle to look at it is that it's really ballsy, and De Palma was bold enough to take that artistic risk that may or may not pay off. But also, one way to look at it, which is kind of the way I'm looking at it, is it kind of undervalues, at least in my opinion, a lot of the investment that the audience has been giving this film for the majority of the film. And it makes it to where you feel like, why did the director force us to watch all of this stuff just for it to be make-believe? But at the same time, I do have to give it a little bit of credit because the events that do unfold in her vision have some sort of payoff by the end of the film and is reincorporated in a way that I think was really interesting and quite clever. So even though I don't really think I'm a huge fan of that approach, I can at the very least respect and see what Brian De Palma was going for. But as I said, I think one of the more impressive aspects of this film is Brian De Palma's style. I like the way he directs the camera throughout this film. He does a great job at kind of shifting between perspectives throughout this entire film. The split screen choice is one example of how he does that. But there are many long takes in this film that really helped keep me engaged. Wasn't a huge fan of the score. The acting from the main actress, Rebecca Romijn, didn't fully do it for me. There are times where I thought it was fine, but then there were other times where I was kind of cringing a little bit at the line delivery, and also just at the dialogue. So again, I don't know if it's fully her fault or not. But Antonio Banderas knocked it out of the park. The twist, in my opinion, is rather questionable. So this film is kind of a mixed bag for me, but I can at the very least say that it's recommendable. And I'm actually curious to hear what all of you think about this film. And I think it's worth watching. So I'll give Femme Fatale a solid 6 out of 10. Brian De Palma has a pretty large filmography, and I'm wondering what you guys think of Brian De Palma as a filmmaker. So please let all that be known in the comment section. And if you really enjoyed what I had to say about Femme Fatale, please give it a thumbs up and share it amongst your friends. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel to be updated on more film-related content.